In this video, we're going to look at how to solve equations. So in 7th grade, you got an introduction to this, but we're going to build upon some of those skills. So when we're simplifying something, in other words, when we have the numbers inputted and we're trying to solve, we want to use our order of operations, our PEMDAS. But when we're trying to work backwards or figure out what the numbers were or determine the value for the area variables, we're going to be working backwards. So we're going to be actually going in the reverse order of operations. So SADMAP really just refers to the reverse order of operations. Now this gets a little bit tricky because sometimes P standing for parentheses, some people use G for that. So it's like a grouping symbol. So there can be actually hidden grouping symbols that we might not see that actually kind of tweak this order a little bit. So we'll talk about that as we get there. So inverse operations, you might recognize adding and subtracting are opposites. Multiplying and dividing are opposites, and as you kind of get into quadratics, squaring, square rooting. So we want to keep in mind this idea of equality, that we want to maintain balance. So what we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So if I want to reverse, I'm trying to isolate what x is, reverse subtract 6, I'm going to add 6 to both sides. So those cancel, and I'm left with 2x must be equal to 24. 2x really means 2 times x, so I'm going to reverse multiplication by division. And I get that x equals 12. I could check this by substituting and then simplifying. And then I would want to use my order of operations to make sure that I simplify. So I'd want to do multiplication before subtraction and make sure that I get a true statement, which I do, 18 equals 18. So this next problem is the same idea, just kind of written a little bit differently. So I have a positive 5. I want to get that to the other side, so I'm going to subtract it. Negative 30 equals negative 6x. So some students get confused whether that's a minus or a negative. You can really think of it as either, but the negative 6 is multiplied by the x, whereas the 5 is positive. Another way I could write this is negative 6x plus 5. Those are the same thing. And I'm going to divide by negative 6, and I get x equals 5. So when we get down here, we can see we have two things that are alike on this side. So when you have things that are alike, you can combine them or simplify them. So if I add 5x and 2x, I get 21. I can divide by 7 on both sides, and I get x equals 3. So in this next problem, I have the variable on both sides. So what I want to do is actually try to get the letters together. So I could go get the letters on the right or get the letters on the left, but what I'm going to try to do is get them together. So I could add or subtract to maintain balance. So if I subtract 2x on this side, I need to subtract 2x on this side. I chose to subtract 2x, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't subtract 4x. And you could also move your numbers around first. So there's a lot of different options in the ways that we solve equations. So now that I have this negative 6, I'm trying to really get variables over here, it looks like, on my right-hand side and numbers over here. So I'm going to add 6 to both sides, and I get 18 equals 2x. And I'm going to undo that multiplication by dividing by 2 and get 9 equals x. Okay, so I'm actually going to skip this one. I'm going to trade that one out, but let's look at this one. So I can undo adding by subtracting. X over 8, or x divided by 8, has to equal 4. So that's the tricky part here, is it looks like a fraction, which can be really confusing to students, but really what we can think about this is x divided by 8 equals 4. And the opposite of division is really multiplication. So I get that x had to be 32. So the tricky kind of problem that you might see is actually something like this. And the tricky part about this is if you're thinking about that SADMAP, or that reverse order of operations, you might be tempted to subtract 5 first. But what's happening here is both of these things are being divided by 8. So technically they're grouped together. Or if I were to think about this, this is x plus 5, both divided by 8. So really, there's kind of these hidden parentheses that I can't get into unless I multiply both sides by 8 first. So I actually have to multiply by 8 first here, and then I'm left with x plus 5 equals 32. And I don't need the parentheses anymore because at this point, x plus 5 in parentheses is the same as x plus 5 without parentheses. So I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides And in this one, I would get x equals 27. We'll look at some harder problems in the next video.